The film starts in the year 2019 when the world is facing consequences of climate change. A flood has already wiped out lower Manhattan while 2 million people died in Madrid from scorching heat in a single day. Due to all of this, nations around the world united to build a net of satellites around the planet, with the International Space Station acting as its command center. These satellites were equipped to neutralize any kind of climate anomalies by deploying countermeasures, and to everyone's relief, the system worked. The world started calling the whole system Dutch Boy, referring to a kid who plugged a dam with his finger. Now, years later, Jake, who built Dutch Boy, is facing a Senate hearing. Jake is being rude to the head of the committee and immediately receives texts from his younger brother Max to tell Jake to stop messing around. Jake is unable to follow his advice and makes a big scene, and after the hearing ends, Max gives him the bad news, that he's being fired. In fact, Max is the one who's going to replace him as the head of the whole program. The news breaks Jake's heart, and also creates a wedge between the two brothers for years. 3 years later, a team of UN personnel in Afghanistan find a town whose every inhabitant is frozen like a popsicle. Back in Washington, Max is asked to brief the president about the incident. There, he tries to flirt with his girlfriend Sarah, but she tells him to keep his distance because she's a member of the Secret Service, and she's working at the moment. At the meeting, President Palma is told that the malfunctioning Dutch Boy satellite caused the deaths of 300 Afghan people in that incident. This information leads to a debate between politicians who are worried about their image and the next election. Max tells them that instead of fighting, they need to fix the problem with Dutch Boy. He wants them to send experts to ISS, and Palma gives them the go-ahead because they're handing over the control to Dutch Boy to the International Committee in 2 weeks, and he doesn't want any problems. While Max is leaving, his mentor and Secretary of State Deckham advises him to choose Jake for this operation, since no one knows Dutch Boy better than him. While politicians are deciding what to do, the malfunctioning Afghan satellite is brought back to ISS. As soon as it docks, the engineer discreetly copies its data on a drive and takes it back to the locker room to hide it. After storing it, he starts walking back to his station, when suddenly the panel opens up and the guy gets blown into space. After learning about this tragedy, Max finally goes to Jake's place where he sees his niece Hannah fixing a solar panel. She runs over to greet him, but their reunion is cut short when Jake comes out of his trailer and asks Hannah to go inside. After Jake is finished complaining about his divorce and uninteresting work, Max tells him that there's something wrong with Dutch Boy. He mentions the Afghan disaster and the dead engineer before asking Jake to go up there to check his system. At first, Jake doesn't want to take the offer, but he loves Dutch Boy, so he agrees to go. That evening in Hong Kong, a researcher named Chung receives data from the Afghan satellite. Chung knows Max and tries to call him but gets no response, so he goes to buy groceries instead. While he's trying to put everything into his car, some eggs fall onto the ground. To Chung's horror, they get fried instantly. Just then, the ground opens up in front of him. This is when he gets into his car and tries to get out of there. The roads are exploding. Still, he keeps driving and somehow makes it out of the city alive, but he can't celebrate because his city is burning right before him. The next morning, Jake is leaving for his mission when Hannah tells him not to go. She overheard Max yesterday and is scared for her dad's safety. When she starts crying, Jake hugs her and makes a promise that he's gonna come back no matter what. After she leaves, Jake goes to the NASA space station and gets ready for the launch. After reaching the orbit, he starts looking around excitedly like a little kid. His shuttle lands inside the ISS, where he's greeted by Chief Commander Uta. While walking through the ISS, he tries to complain about some issues, but Uta reminds him that their main goal is to find out what caused those big malfunctions. She takes him to meet some experts who are already on ISS. A young computer engineer named Duncan isn't excited about working with an American expert, but after learning that Jake actually built Dutch Boy, he becomes more polite. While Jake starts investigating, Max receives a call from Chung, who says that what happened in Hong Kong was caused by a malfunctioning satellite above Hong Kong. This information confuses Max, but he gets completely overwhelmed after learning that no one, including him, can access those satellites. Chung tells him that there's some serious problems with Dutch Boy, and someone in the White House is trying to cover it up. He warns that if these problems go unchecked, they can create a geostorm, which will wipe out the entire planet. After hanging up, Chung keeps looking for answers, but soon the power goes out, and he can see some people outside his door. He hides, and he watches some gunmen take away his laptop. The next day, Max meets up with his colleague Dana and asks her to check his hollow frame. She begrudgingly starts checking it, and soon finds out that someone is deliberately trying to stop Max from accessing some specific satellites. After confirming that he's been hacked, Max gets on a conference call with his brother. During the call, Deckham makes it clear that Jake has to report directly to Max and no one else. Jake doesn't like that, but he has no choice. Besides, he has bigger problems because he now knows that someone is intentionally trying to destroy Dutch Boy. He needs proof for his suspicion, so he decides to bring in the Hong Kong satellite to check its data. His whole team is waiting as the Hong Kong satellite is brought inside the hangar. But before they can copy its data, the robotic arms carrying it start going crazy, and everyone has to move quickly to save their lives. After the robot stops thrashing around, Jake looks in despair at the completely destroyed satellite. He thinks they don't have any data left from the malfunctions, but just then an engineer named Dusset tells him about the broken panel that's still stuck to the outer shell of the ISS. While Jake is getting ready to grab the drive from that panel, Max gets a call from Chung, who has come to Washington and wants to meet him as soon as he can. Back on ISS, Jake and Uta go out to retrieve the panel. After grabbing it, they are on their way back when Jake's suit starts acting up. He ejects from it, but he's moving too fast. His team is afraid that they're gonna lose him, but by some miracle he grabs a cable and stays connected to ISS. Uta brings him back inside and he shows her the hard drive he took out from the panel before things went south. However, he keeps the hard drive hidden from the rest of the team. Uta asks him why he did that, and he explains that someone on their team is intentionally trying to sabotage Dutch Boy. They check the drive, and Uta confirms that it has been corrupted by someone who's removed his logging signature from the drive. Jake tries to access a hidden library to find the culprit behind all of it, but he doesn't have access to the backup logs. Back on Earth, Max is waiting anxiously for Chung, when he looks in horror as someone pushes Chung onto the road, and he gets hit by a car. Max immediately checks up on his friend while Sarah tries to stop the assailant, but she's too late. During his last breath, Chung tells Max to check out Project Zeus. Max is in pain, but he has no time to mourn because Jack wants to have a virtual conference. During this conference, he apologizes to his brother and reminds him about some code whenever they were kids and the time they went fishing with their dad. All of this cheers up Max and he goes straight to Dana to talk about this. He tells her that everything Jake said in the conference was actually code. The brothers made up a code when they were kids, and after cracking it, Max gets the hidden message. Jake has told him that someone at the highest level of the government is trying to destroy the planet, so they should not trust anyone. This message freaks out Dana, but she still agrees to help. So Max asks her to look up Project Zeus, but for some reason only the White House personnel can access it, and Dana is quick to remind Max that his girlfriend has that access. That evening, Sarah comes home and pulls out her gun after finding Dana in her kitchen. Max comes there to defuse the situation and explain everything to her. She doesn't want to help them hack the White House, but Max tells her that Chung died while trying to give him that information, so he has to check it out. Up in space, Jake and Uta check their security footage to see why the engineer died. They realize that the guy had copied the data from the satellite and put it somewhere in the locker room. They go in there to check his locker, but it's empty. Just then, Dusset comes there with a gun in his hand and asks what they're doing. When Jake tells them that they're trying to find out what's wrong with Dutch Boy, he agrees to help. He shows them the locker used by the dead engineer that day, and luckily the drive is still in there. After checking it, Jake is 100% sure that someone put a virus inside Dutch Boy, which is causing it to go haywire. Meanwhile on Earth, after getting Sarah's permission, Dana and Max finally get access to Project Zeus. It's a storm simulation, and they figure out that someone is causing climate disasters according to the simulation to create a geostorm. That night, Max gets into another conference call with his brother and explains how someone has weaponized Dutch Boy. Jake, on the other hand, tells him about the virus and says that they have to reboot the system to remove it, but unfortunately, only the president has the codes to reboot Dutch Boy. Max thinks he can convince the president, but he's shocked when his brother explains that the whole thing might actually be planned by the president, because only he could remove Jake's authority to check the backup logs. After hearing this, Max leaves to get the codes. The president is going to Orlando for a speech, and Jake joins him, claiming that he's going to meet his father. He tells Sarah about the whole situation, and she says that he can steal the codes stored inside the hollow frame when he's taking a shower. Inside ISS, Jake learns that hundreds of satellites are starting to malfunction all over the world. One of these satellites caused a giant hailstorm in Tokyo, which destroyed most of the city. Another one is freezing the ocean near Rio de Janeiro. Jake is looking at all of this hopelessly when he gets an idea. He orders his team to launch the replacement satellites for these malfunctioning satellites. He believes that the replacement ones will collide with the corrupted ones and destroy them. His crew immediately launches a satellite, and to their delight, the plan works, and Rio is spared. Max hears about the disaster and finds out that Orlando is going to be next. Just then, Deckham asks why he lied about meeting his father, when they both know that his dad died years ago. Max has no other choice, so he tells Deckham the whole situation. Deckham explains that the codes are actually Palma's fingerprints and retinal scans, so they need to convince him to reboot Dutch Boy. Back on ISS, things get worse when the self-destruction protocol begins. The ship is breaking apart, so Jake orders everyone to evacuate. He still wants to save ISS, and the only one who can override the protocol is Duncan, who is nowhere to be found. Jake finds him and beats him up when he realizes that Duncan was the one who sabotaged everything. He's asking Duncan to override the protocol, but Duncan pulls out a gun and says he did it for the money, and he isn't gonna help Jake Jake under any circumstances. Jake tries to grab his gun, but Duncan shoots a glass panel. Jake knows what's going to happen, so he leaves the room while Duncan gets sucked into space after the panel breaks. Back on Earth, Max is going to Palma's waiting room with Deckham, who suddenly tries to shoot him. Max somehow escapes certain death, but Deckham orders his men to keep the president inside that venue. Max goes straight to Sarah and tells her that the only way that they can save the world is by kidnapping the president. She tells him to get a car while she causes chaos by firing her gun inside the venue. While the president is being taken away to safety, she takes down the other officer and forces the president to go with her. Outside, she finds Max, who's stolen a self-driving taxi for their escape. While they're trying to get out of Orlando, the satellites are getting ready to start Geostorm in only 55 minutes. In India, people are watching giant tornadoes while Orlando is experiencing hundreds of lightning strikes. Max explains to the president how Deckham is trying to eliminate him and everyone else in the secession line so that he can become the next president and destroy all of his enemies under the power of Dutch Boy. The president doesn't want to believe it, but when Deckham's men start shooting at them, he understands the situation. Sarah takes care of their pursuers by shooting one of them and pushing the other one off the road, causing him to get hit by lightning. Back on ISS, everyone's ready to leave, but Jake says that someone has to reboot the system manually, so he'll stay and wait for Max to get the codes. Uta says he'll die, but she understands that they don't have another choice. Back in Orlando, when Deckham sees the cab coming toward him, he orders his man to shoot it with a rocket launcher. The car explodes, but Deckham soon learns that no one was inside it. Just then, Sarah takes out his man and puts a gun to his head before handing him to the Secret Service. He says that he did all of this to make America the center of power once again. His remarks infuriate Max, who punches him in the face. He then goes to NASA's control room to talk to Jake. Meanwhile, in UAE, a giant tsunami engulfs the entire city of Dubai. By the time Max reaches the control room, they have less than 10 minutes before the storm. The president instantly sends the codes to Jake and thanks him for saving his country and humanity. This is when Max realizes that his brother is never going to come back. He feels guilty for sending him on this mission, but Jake says that he made the right choice. He apologizes for being an irresponsible brother and asks Max to take care of Hannah. After that, he gets the codes and runs as fast as he can to reboot the system, but his path is cut off and he also loses gravity. With only a couple of minutes before the end of the world, Jake gets into his spacesuit and goes up to the command center, but the door isn't opening. Luckily, Uta also stayed behind because she knew he would need help. After saying that he's opening the wrong door, she takes him to the command center where he uploads the reboot codes. He then waits patiently to pull the plug while the satellites shut down one by one. With only a couple of seconds remaining, the final satellite shuts down and he reboots the entire system. His plan works and the virus gets removed, which immediately stops all the crazy storms. While the world is saved, Max and Uta are pretty much dead because the space station is breaking apart. This is when Jake notices a satellite. He tells Uta to follow him as he gets into the satellite and tells Uta to get in it. They manage to get inside it just before a giant explosion turns ISS into a cloud of debris. Max is tearing up after thinking his brother is dead, but one of the NASA engineers notices a strange satellite on the horizon. The satellite is giving SOS signals. Max immediately orders a space shuttle to grab it, and this is how Uta and Jake are saved. Their family and friends are over the moon after learning that they're alive, and as they land back on Earth, Max is on the tarmac to receive his brother. The president acknowledges Jake's bravery, while the brothers hug each other for the first time in many years. 6 months later, they're both fishing with Hannah near Jake's house. They soon get fed up with this activity, and the film ends with the brothers going back while Hannah says that even though Dutch Boy was built by the US, it belongs to the entire world. If you enjoyed that recap, I got a good feeling that you'll like this one too. Click on the video on your screen for more.